Okay, and then we have our speakers who I am going to introduce now. Okay, so we have our first speakers here are Joe Potter and Katie Hardcastle, and they are from the Samaritans, and Katie is the Senior Research Manager for the Samaritans, and Joe Potter is the Policy Manager of Samaritans since 2019. And there's more details about their roles and their works on the flyer that you will have received. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about their roles in the Samaritans. And of course, they brought out the excellent report that's pushed from pillar to post about people's experiences of trying to access care for people who've self-harmed, and we're doing some similar work in this area that resonates a lot with this report. And then we have Faraz Mughal, who we are very fortunate enough to have working with us as well on the Patient Safety Translation Research Centre on a secondment. He's finishing it up now. He is an academic GP, and he's been working for quite a while doing different research on improving care for people who have self-harmed and are in suicidal distress in primary care. And he's on another fellowship now. He's one of these superstars out there. And he has done some outstanding work. And after this meeting, we will send out some of the papers and relevant documents. So I'm going to stop this sharing now, and I am going to hand over now to Katie and Joe, who are going to share their screens. Please do feel free to chat and introduce yourselves and put any questions or comments in the chat. And thanks again for everybody being here today. Okay, so Joe, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, everyone. And thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name's Joe Potter. I am Policy Manager at Samaritans, and we're going to be speaking to you today about our research Push from Pillar to Post that Leah mentioned in her introduction. Katie is with me too, if you want to introduce yourself, Katie.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Katie Hardcastle. Nice to see you all.
Grand. Katie, I think you're kicking us off with a bit of background information.
Yes, so I'm just going to really briefly give a bit of background to Samaritans, and then I'm going to hand back over to Joe for all of the heavy lifting in this presentation to talk about our work. So just by way of introduction though, Samaritans' vision is that people die by suicide. We're probably almost certainly most well known for our listening service. So across 200 branches, 2,000 volunteers, we're there for anyone, anytime. And you can see here on this infographic that we respond to a call for help every 10 seconds. And this is not just phone calls. People can email us, write us a letter, or speak to us online. Next slide, please, Joe. So we're always available around the clock every single day of the year and for anyone that needs us, but we don't just sit and listen. We take our support out into communities. We work in partnership with people like the rail industry or prisons to improve support for those that are most vulnerable. And we use our expertise to try and influence governments, the media and other agencies to take action to help reduce suicide and self-harm. And this includes producing and translating research and evidence of what's needed and what works. And increasingly over the last few years, we've been working hard to embed the voices of lived experience in our work. So currently we have a lived experience panel of over 400 respondents who answer survey questions for us quite regularly. And we're looking and finding ways to involve lived experience advisors in our research projects and other work. Next slide, please, Joe. So why are we interested in self-harm at Samaritans? Well, you'll see here that people contact us for emotional support on a number of different issues. Self-harm is discussed in almost 1 in 12 calls where emotional support is provided by one of our listening volunteers. And some data we actually have from 2020 suggested that for around 1 in 7 of those calls about self-harm, the person contacted us to resist self-harming. So we know that self-harm is a primary risk factor for suicide. However, we also understand that the majority of people who self-harm do not go on to take their own lives. But self-harm is often a sign of this serious emotional distress in and of itself. Since we know that many people who self-harm don't seek medical help, Samaritans believes that more needs to be done to break down stigma associated with self-harm and to raise awareness across communities about self-harm and the support that's available. And we're working to kind of improve the quality and value of that support. So with that, Joe, if you want to take over to talk more about our work in detail.
Sure, thanks, Katie. So there were 3 primary questions that we had for Push from Pillar to Post, which I should say is available on our website. In fact, maybe Katie, you might be able to put a link in the chat to the report. There are 3 questions. What prevents people who have self-harmed receiving appropriate support? Does available support help people to stop self-harming and reduce their emotional distress? And how can this support be improved? From a policy point of view, that 3rd question was really crucial. So we surveyed people who have self-harmed. We undertook interviews with people who have self-harmed, and we also we analysed our service data and spoke to our volunteers. But what we really wanted to do was to get the voice of lived experience through the whole of this report, to be guided absolutely by the voice of lived experience. I think we managed to achieve that. And if you do get your hands on the report, there are many examples of verbatim quotes, anonymous, from people that we spoke to. We spoke to people about it's a big report, and it's a wide-ranging report. We spoke to people about lots of different available help for them. 54% of the people that we spoke to had sought support after their most recent act of self-harm, but they went in lots of different areas, and people tried more than one set of support. The focus of today's presentation is going to be on mental health services. 25% of people sought support from mental health services. And I think we got the most compelling and interesting evidence around people's experience of those services. What I should say is that no one support type met people's needs consistently or completely. And actually, none of these types of support were rated very useful as to meeting the needs of people who self-harm alone. So there's more that can be done in all of these areas, but this presentation will focus on mental health services. What we found, what the big, I suppose, takeaway from Push from Pillar to Post was exclusion from mental health services for people who self-harm. People were telling us, many people were really at their wits' end, telling us, I've been told on the basis of my self-harm, I present too high a risk for IAPT. However, if I try and get support from community mental health services, I'm told that my needs aren't severe enough. And one participant said it feels like being pushed from pillar to post, hence the title of our report. I think what came through in the testimonies to us is that, as everyone will know on this meeting today, reaching out for support for something that there is so much misinformation, stigma, and misunderstanding around is a really difficult thing. But many people told us once they had reached out for support, they were falling between gaps in services, deemed too ill for one service but not ill enough for another. And therefore, while we know that access to mental health support is a problem across the board, we think that people who self-harm face really unique barriers to accessing that support. For those who managed to get support, and some did, unfortunately, they found that services are not set up with self-harm in mind. People told us that they were told not to mention self-harm in group settings. They were told that if they were going to continue with support, then they would have to cease the self-harming. But a number of people said to us, well, self-harm at the moment is my coping mechanism. It's what keeps me here. And so to be told I can't use the one thing that is kind of keeping me here and allowing to keep me carrying on, it's actually a really, really difficult thing. And so there was the initial exclusion from services, but even when services were accessed, they found they weren't really, and we're thinking about IAP services primarily here, but different kind of primary mental health services provided through the NHS. People were told us, we just don't feel like these services are set up to meet my needs. And the result of that is that people found it really difficult to understand their triggers, understand patterns in their self-harming behavior, but also to develop coping mechanisms for their self-harm, alternative coping mechanisms. So really the services that they were accessing a lot of the time did not feel right for them. This is a quote that unfortunately is, I don't know why, but not quite showing very well. But it says, in group settings, this is from Tabby, you're not allowed to say the word self-harm, and you're not allowed to talk about any situations. You can't use examples using self-harm. And what Tabby told us is this is another way of stigmatizing. She felt that her behavior, her self-harm was being further stigmatized by services. And it was actually a very alienating experience to have reached out for support and then to be pushed back and say, actually, the way that you're dealing with things isn't right for the support that we give. As you can see from Tabby, it felt, very isolating. We wanted to understand off the back of Push from Pillar to Post a bit more about exactly, dig beneath why these access problems were happening. And so we sent freedom of information requests to 12 NHS trusts, evenly distributed across the country. And we asked them about their IAP service and how they dealt with self-harm. And we came to 3 main conclusions, much of which won't be massively sort of new or revelatory to people on the call, but sort of furthered and deepened our understanding about the issue of IAP and self-harm. Firstly, we found that IAP services are not set up to support people with their self-harm behavior, and crucially don't see this as part of their purpose. And in of itself, we had people pushing back through the FOI saying, well, we were never set up to deal with this. And therefore, we are not the best place for people who self-harm to come to. Unfortunately, what we found through our Push from Pillar to Post research is that many, many people are being referred. So if a person turns up to their GP saying that they are maybe, anxious or depressed, they often, and self-harming, they will be oftentimes referred in. So there's an obvious disconnect between how IAP services see themselves and the referrals that they're receiving. IAP services told us they will only support people who self-harm if their primary issue is deemed to be a common mental health problem. And this third one, that ultimately we and many other people have been, Samaritans have been calling for self-harm to be taken seriously for a number of years. And actually, I think we've got to the point now amongst some services, some IAP services, where self-harm, the people who self-harm are sort of viewed as a blanket risk, which almost treats self-harm as analogous to suicide risk. And people actually aren't being looked at for their own personal circumstances, there's a kind of blanket blanket perception of risk for everyone who self-harms, no matter what their circumstances, no matter where they're at with that journey. And that actually means that people are just being excluded almost en masse by some services. So we've been working with NHS England, speaking to them around the guidance, and people on this call may know that in August of 2021, last summer, the national guidance changed for IAPT practitioners. So previously, while the national guidance didn't exclude people who self-harm, it was less clear than it currently is. And it kind of risked conflating self-harm and suicide. And we think that this is part of, it was a contributing factor to IAPT services feeling like they lack the confidence, the expertise, the capacity to manage the perceived risk. So the new guidance, which, as I say, was changed last summer, we really welcomed that change, which makes it much clearer that people who self-harm should not automatically be excluded from IAPT if what they're presenting with, the other factors they're presenting with, is something that IAPT could help with. So we understand that Samaritans, that IAPT won't be right for everyone who self-harms, but we want it to be available to more people. We don't want there to be this kind of blanket exclusion, and we want there to be more of a case-by-case understanding and recognition of the different experiences that people who self-harm have, and for IAPT to be part of a much wider, more comprehensive system of support for people who self-harm. The new guidance must result in the end of people being pushed from pillar to post. And we want government to commit more resource to increase the capacity and expertise of mental health services in general to support people who self-harm. And that'll be a central part of our response to the government's consultation on a new suicide prevention strategy. I'm going to hand back over to Katie now.
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, we just wanted to really briefly finish by highlighting some of our new and ongoing priorities for self-harm research. So Joe's the work that's happened to date, but what does this look like for us moving forward? So we will be continuing to focus on kind of groups that are at greater risk, understanding who they are, what do they need from us, as well as how they can be better supported across services. We're broadening our focus slightly to think not just about risk, but think more in the space of protective factors and what that means, the support that we provide and also the support we advocate for. And lastly, we're building kind of specific research for the next couple of years on self-harm in prisons. So just a kind of flavour there really to finish with about where our research might be taking us over the coming years as well.
Great. I think we've run a little bit over. Apologies for that, but here are our contact details if anyone wants to get in touch.